Hong Kong, 1954. A narrow staircase in the Yomate district. A 14-year-old boy climbs the stairs with the nervous energy of someone about to meet his destiny. He doesn't know this yet. He thinks he's just going to learn how to fight. He thinks he's just looking for a way to stop losing street battles. He thinks this is about survival. He has no idea that the man waiting at the top of those stairs will reshape his entire understanding of what it means to be human. The boy's name is Lee Jun-fan. The world will come to know him as Bruce Lee. The man waiting upstairs is IP Man. And this meeting will change martial arts forever. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand who IP Man was before Bruce Lee ever found him. IP Man was born in 1893 in Foshan, China, to one of the wealthiest families in the region. His childhood home was a mansion. His education was classical. His future seemed destined for business or government, the traditional paths of the Chinese elite. But young IP Man had other interests. At the age of 7, he began studying Wing Chun Kung Fu under Chan Hua-shun, an elderly master who taught in the IP family's ancestral temple. The arrangement was unusual. Chan Hua-shun was a commoner, a former money changer who had learned martial arts late in life. For him to teach the son of a wealthy family was a crossing of social boundaries that would have been unthinkable in earlier times. But IP Man's family saw something in the boy, a focus, a hunger, a need to understand combat that went beyond the physical. Chan Hua-shun died when IP Man was 13, but the seed had been planted. IP Man continued training with his senior classmate, Inya Chang-sok, and later in Hong Kong with Leung Bik, Chan Hua-shun's senior and one of the original students of Wing Chun's legendary founder. By the time he returned to Foshan as a young man, IP Man was already considered a master, but he never taught publicly. He practiced privately. He worked as a police officer. He raised a family. Wing Chun was his passion, but it was not his profession. Then came the Japanese invasion. World War II devastated China. Foshan fell to the Japanese. IP Man's wealth evaporated. His property was seized. His comfortable life collapsed into poverty and survival. He refused to teach martial arts to the Japanese military, despite their pressure and threats. This decision cost him dearly. He spent the war years in deprivation, watching his country suffer, holding on to his principles when compromise would have been easier. After the war, China's civil war brought new chaos. The Communist Revolution in 1949 forced IP Man to flee to Hong Kong, leaving behind his wife and children. He arrived in the British colony with nothing. No money, no connections, no prospects. He was 56 years old. His life, by any conventional measure, was over. But sometimes destruction clears the ground for something new to grow. In Hong Kong, with no other options, IP Man finally began teaching Wing Chun publicly. He opened a school in a restaurant workers' union building. His students were waiters, cooks, factory workers, people who needed practical fighting skills for the rough streets of a crowded city. Word spread. IP Man's Wing Chun was different from other martial arts. It was direct, efficient. It didn't waste motion on flashy techniques that looked impressive, but failed in real combat. It was designed for close-range fighting, for the narrow alleys and cramped spaces where Hong Kong's street battles actually happened. Students came, then more students, then students who would become masters themselves. And then, in 1954, a 14-year-old troublemaker climbed those narrow stairs in Yomate. Bruce Lee was not an obvious candidate for martial arts mastery. He was scrawny, hyperactive, unable to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. He had been kicked out of multiple schools for fighting. His parents were at their wits' end, trying to figure out what to do with this impossible child. He had tried other martial arts before. Tai Chi with his father, who was a famous Cantonese opera performer, some Western boxing. But nothing had stuck. Nothing had captured his attention long enough to develop real skill. He came to IP Man's school because he kept losing street fights. Hong Kong in the 1950s was a violent place. Gangs controlled territories. Young men proved themselves through combat. And Bruce Lee, despite his bravado, was getting beaten. He needed to learn how to win. IP Man saw something different when he looked at this restless teenager. He saw potential, raw, unfocused, almost frightening in its intensity. This boy had something that couldn't be taught, a natural understanding of movement, an instinctive grasp of distance and timing, a fire that burned so hot it threatened to consume everything around it. But fire without control is just destruction. IP Man's job was to teach control. The training began. Wing Chun is built on a foundation called Siu Nim Tao, which translates to little idea or small thought. It's a solo form, practiced standing in place, developing the basic structures and energy pathways that all Wing Chun techniques depend on. To an outside observer, Siu Nim Tao looks almost boring. No high kicks, no spinning moves, no dramatic poses, just a person standing still, moving their arms in precise, repetitive patterns. Bruce Lee hated it. He wanted to fight. He wanted to learn the techniques that would let him destroy his enemies. He wanted power and speed and the ability to humiliate anyone who challenged him. IP Man made him stand still, day after day, week after week, month after month. While other students progressed to partner drills and sparring, Bruce Lee stood in place, practicing Siu Nim Tao until his legs burned and his mind screamed for stimulation. Why? Bruce Lee demanded one day, his frustration boiling over. Why must I stand here like a statue while others are fighting? IP Man's response was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had answered this question 100 times before. A building with a weak foundation will collapse when the storm comes, he said. You want to fight, but fighting is the roof of the house. We are still building the foundation. Bruce Lee didn't understand. Not then. He was 14 years old and burning with the need to prove himself. Philosophy was just words. He wanted action. But IP Man was patient. He knew the true understanding couldn't be given. It had to be discovered. And so he waited, day after day, correcting Bruce Lee's stance by fractions of inches, adjusting his arm positions by degrees, teaching through repetition what could not be taught through explanation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change in the restless teenager. He started to feel it. The connection between his feet and the ground, the alignment of his spine. the relaxed tension in his arms that allowed power to flow without muscular effort, the stillness at the center of motion. It was torture. It was also the most important training he would ever receive. Because IP Man wasn't teaching Bruce Lee how to fight. He was teaching Bruce Lee how to think. Wing Chun's genius is its simplicity. Where other martial arts add techniques, Wing Chun subtracts. Where other styles emphasize power, Wing Chun emphasizes efficiency. The goal is not to overwhelm an opponent with force, but to redirect their force against them. To find the shortest path between intention and action. To eliminate everything unnecessary. These principles would later become the foundation of Bruce Lee's own martial philosophy. The famous concepts that made him legendary, economy of motion, directness, adaptability, all of them trace back to those endless hours standing in IP Man's school, practicing the little idea until it became part of his nervous system. But the relationship between IP Man and Bruce Lee was never simple. IP Man was traditional in ways that Bruce Lee would later reject. He believed in preserving Wing Chun exactly as it had been passed down to him. He was suspicious of innovation, of mixing styles, of the kind of experimentation that Bruce Lee would eventually make his signature. And there was another problem. Bruce Lee was part German on his mother's side. In the racial politics of 1950s Hong Kong, this made him not fully Chinese. Some of IP Man's senior students objected to teaching Wing Chun to someone with foreign blood. They saw it as a betrayal of tradition, a sharing of Chinese secrets with an outsider. IP Man overruled them. Bruce Lee trained with IP Man for approximately 4 years, from 1954 to 1958. In that time, he progressed rapidly through the Wing Chun system, though he never completed the entire curriculum. His natural talent accelerated his learning, but his impatience sometimes held him back. He was IP Man's most gifted student. He was also, in many ways, his most difficult. Bruce Lee challenged everything. He questioned techniques that had been passed down for generations. He wanted to know why, not just how. He pushed against boundaries that other students accepted without question. Some masters would have expelled such a troublesome student. IP Man tolerated him. Perhaps he recognized that the qualities that made Bruce Lee difficult were the same qualities that made him exceptional. Perhaps he saw in this restless teenager the future of martial arts, even if that future would look nothing like the tradition he had dedicated his life to preserving. Or perhaps he simply loved the boy, because despite the conflicts, despite the philosophical differences, despite everything that would later separate them, there was real affection between IP Man and Bruce Lee. The kind of bond that forms between a master and a student who sees the world differently, but shares the same fundamental passion. In 1959, Bruce Lee's parents made a decision that would change everything. Their son was in trouble. The street fighting had escalated. Bruce Lee had beaten the son of a feared triad family, and there were threats of retaliation. Hong Kong had become too dangerous for this talented, reckless, impossible young man. They sent him to America. Bruce Lee left Hong Kong with $100 in his pocket and the martial arts foundation that IP Man had given him. He would never train regularly with his master again. The separation was painful in ways that neither man fully acknowledged. For IP Man, losing his most talented student must have been bittersweet. He had invested years in Bruce Lee's development. He had seen potential that others missed. He had tolerated behavior that would have gotten any other student expelled. And now that student was leaving, taking his gifts to a distant country where IP Man could no longer guide him. For Bruce Lee, leaving IP Man meant losing the only teacher who had ever truly reached him. He had studied with other instructors before. He would study with others after. But IP Man was different. IP Man had seen through his defenses. IP Man had demanded more from him than anyone else. IP Man had refused to let him settle for less than his best. In America, Bruce Lee would sometimes speak of his teacher with a mixture of reverence and something approaching grief. The physical distance between them was thousands of miles, but the emotional distance was harder to measure. He sent letters, he sent money, he sent news of his progress. But it wasn't the same as training in that small school in Yomate, feeling IP Man's corrections, absorbing wisdom that couldn't be put into words. But the separation was not a clean break. Over the years that followed, as Bruce Lee developed his own approach to martial arts, as he created Jeet Kune Do and rejected the traditional forms that IP Man cherished, he never stopped acknowledging his debt to his teacher. Wing Chun is the foundation of everything I do, Bruce Lee said in interviews. Without IP Man, there would be no Bruce Lee. This was not flattery. It was simple truth. The centerline theory that governs Jeet Kune Do comes directly from Wing Chun. The emphasis on economy of motion, on directness, on simultaneous attack and defense. All of these are Wing Chun principles that Bruce Lee absorbed so deeply, they became inseparable from his own innovations. He didn't copy IP Man. He evolved from IP Man. He took what he learned and pushed it further than his teacher ever would have. And this, perhaps, is the highest tribute a student can pay to a master. IP Man reportedly had mixed feelings about Bruce Lee's evolution. On one hand, he was proud of his student's success. Bruce Lee had become the most famous martial artist in the world. He had introduced Wing Chun to a global audience that IP Man could never have reached. The art that IP Man had preserved through war and exile and poverty was now known everywhere. On the other hand, Bruce Lee's public criticism of traditional martial arts, including some aspects of Wing Chun, troubled him. Bruce Lee spoke openly about the limitations of classical techniques, about the need to adapt and evolve, about the danger of treating any style as complete or perfect. This was not what IP Man had taught. This was not how a proper student honored his lineage. But IP Man never publicly criticized Bruce Lee. Whatever he felt privately, he kept to himself. And when visitors came to his school and asked about his famous student, he spoke with quiet pride. He was the best, IP Man would say simply, the most talented student I ever had. Bruce Lee, for his part, never stopped sending money to his teacher. Even as his own fame and fortune grew, he remembered the man who had given him his foundation. He supported IP Man financially in his later years, an act of filial piety that spoke louder than any philosophical disagreement. They saw each other only a few times after Bruce Lee left Hong Kong. Brief visits when Bruce returned for film work. Conversations that lasted hours but never quite bridged the gap between tradition and innovation. And then, in December 1972, IP Man died. He was 79 years old. He had lived long enough to see his art spread around the world, carried by students who had become masters themselves. He had lived long enough to see Bruce Lee become a global phenomenon. He had lived long enough to know that Wing Chun would survive him. 7 months later, Bruce Lee followed him into death. July 20th, 1973. Bruce Lee was 32 years old. The cause was a cerebral edema. The man who had seemed invincible, who had moved with a speed that cameras could barely capture, who had revolutionized martial arts and cinema, was gone. Master and student, both gone within 7 months of each other. Some said it was coincidence. Some said it was destiny. Some said that the bond between them was so deep that one could not long survive without the other. What is certain is this: the story of martial arts in the 20th century cannot be told without both of them. Ip Man preserved Wing Chun through the most turbulent period in Chinese history. He kept the flame alive when everything around him was burning. He passed his knowledge to students who would carry it forward. Bruce Lee took that flame and set the world on fire. He showed millions of people what martial arts could be. He inspired generations to begin their own journeys. He proved that the ancient arts were not museum pieces, but living, evolving expressions of human potential. Together, they represent the complete cycle of martial arts transmission: the guardian and the revolutionary, the keeper of tradition and the breaker of boundaries, the master who preserves and the student who transforms. Neither could exist without the other. There is a concept in Chinese philosophy called the transmission of the lamp. It refers to the passing of wisdom from teacher to student, the unbroken chain of knowledge that stretches back through generations. When the lamp is passed, the teacher's flame does not diminish. Instead, it multiplies. The student carries the light forward, illuminating paths the teacher never walked. Ip Man was the lamp. Bruce Lee was the flame that spread to light a million other fires. Today, Wing Chun is practiced on every continent. Ip Man's legacy continues through his students and their students and their students after them. The art he preserved through poverty and war and exile is now part of humanity's shared heritage. Films have been made about Ip Man. Donnie Yen portrayed him in a series of blockbusters that introduced his story to millions who had never heard of Wing Chun. His life has become legend, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes mythologized, but always centered on the truth of what he accomplished. He kept the art alive. When everything else was taken from him, he held on to that. And Bruce Lee's influence is so pervasive that it's almost invisible, like air or water. Every martial arts film made today exists in his shadow. Every mixed martial artist who cross-trains in multiple styles is following his example. Every person who has ever punched a heavy bag in a garage, inspired by something they saw on screen, is connected to him. The UFC, the most popular combat sports organization in the world, traces its philosophical roots directly to Bruce Lee's ideas about combining effective techniques from multiple martial arts. The concept of mixed martial arts, which now seems obvious, was radical when Bruce Lee first articulated it. And where did he learn that effectiveness mattered more than tradition? In Ip Man's school, practicing an art designed for real fighting, not performance. The connection is unbroken. The lineage is clear. The boy who climbed those narrow stairs in 1954 became the most influential martial artist in history. The master who waited at the top of those stairs made that transformation possible. Ip Man and Bruce Lee, teacher and student, tradition and revolution. Two men who changed the world by finding each other at exactly the right moment. That's the real story. Not a story of conflict between old and new, but a story of transmission, of evolution, of the eternal cycle by which masters create students who surpass them, and in surpassing them, honor them most deeply. The lamp was passed. The flame still burns, and somewhere in the narrow streets of Yomate, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the footsteps of a restless teenager climbing the stairs toward his destiny.